You're sitting perfectly still, perhaps in a soft chair with a screen in your hand, yet something very strange is happening to your skin. The tiny hairs on your forearms are beginning to stand up. You might feel a faint ripple of cold, even if the room is warm. This is piloerection. It is a mundane, almost annoying physical quirk we've all experienced 1,000 times. But in the context of our deep history, this tiny movement of your skin is a ghost. It is a biological fossil, a remnant of a time when your ancestors were covered in thick fur and needed to look twice as large to survive the next 30 seconds. When you feel that shiver, you aren't just reacting to a draft. You are experiencing the exact same mechanical defense mechanism that a terrified hominid felt 2 million years ago on the edge of a drying lakebed. That small prickle of skin was once the difference between being a predator's meal or the survivor who lived to tell the story. Have you ever wondered if that ancient chill is trying to tell you something your modern mind has forgotten? To understand what ancient humans did when they were scared, we have to look at the architecture of the brain itself. Dr. Joseph Ledoux, a neuroscientist at New York University and author of The Emotional Brain, has spent decades mapping the amygdala, the almond-shaped cluster of nuclei deep within our temporal lobes. This is the command center for fear. When an ancient human heard a rustle in the tall grass of the Pleistocene, they didn't have the luxury of conscious thought. They didn't weigh the pros and cons of the sound. The amygdala would trigger a high road and a low road response. The low road is a lightning-fast shortcut that sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus before you even know what you're looking at. Within milliseconds, the adrenal glands would flood the bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline. The heart rate would skyrocket, pumping oxygen-rich blood to the large muscle groups in the legs and arms. This wasn't a choice. It was a biological hijacking. But what happens when the fear isn't a rustle in the grass, but a shadow from above? For a long time, we assumed ancient humans only feared things on the ground, like saber-toothed cats or massive hyenas. But in 1924, a discovery by Raymond Dart changed our entire understanding of prehistoric terror. He found the skull of a young Australopithecus africanus, now famously known as the Tongue Child, which lived roughly 2.8 million years ago. For decades, the cause of the child's death was a mystery. It wasn't until modern researchers, including Lee Berger and Ron Clark, performed a forensic analysis that the horrifying truth emerged. The skull had distinct puncture marks in the base of the eye sockets, marks that perfectly matched the talons of a large bird of prey, specifically a prehistoric eagle similar to the modern African crowned eagle. Imagine the specialized fear of the sky. Our ancestors didn't just look at the horizon. They scanned the clouds. This led to a hypervigilance that is still baked into our visual processing today. We are incredibly sensitive to rapid movements in our upper peripheral vision. When you flinch at a shadow passing over you on a sunny day, you are channeling the 3 million-year-old fear of a creature that could drop from the blue and end your life before you could scream. But did this constant state of alert actually make our ancestors smarter? This pressure of predation forced a massive shift in how humans moved through the world. We became a species defined by the landscape of fear. This concept, championed by ecologists like Dr. John Landry, suggests that the physical behavior of a species is shaped more by where they fear to be than where they want to be. For ancient humans, this meant a total reorganization of their day. They became masters of timing. They learned to identify the blue hour, that transitional twilight when the predators of the day were bedding down and the hunters of the night were just waking up. This was the most terrifying time of the day. The shadows grew long, and the human eye, which excels at detail in bright light, began to fail. To survive this, they did something revolutionary. They gathered. They didn't just huddle for warmth, they huddled for sensory expansion. If you have 10 people in a circle, you have 20 ears and 20 eyes scanning in every direction. This collective vigilance allowed the individual to drop their guard just enough to rest. But what happened when the darkness was so absolute that even 20 pairs of eyes couldn't see the threat? This is where the greatest turning point in the history of human fear occurs. Roughly 1 million to 400,000 years ago, depending on which archaeological site you prioritize, humans mastered fire. Dr. Polly Wiesner, an anthropologist at the University of Utah, has conducted fascinating research on how fire changed human psychology. She compared the conversations of the Juhansi people in southern Africa during the day versus their conversations around a fire at night. During the day, talk is functional, often involving work or gossip. But at night, in the flickering circle of light, The conversation shifts to storytelling, myth, and the supernatural. Fire didn't just keep the lions away, it created a psychological safe zone. For the first time, ancient humans could take the raw energy of their fear and transform it into a narrative. They began to name the things they were afraid of. They turned the monster in the dark into a character in a story, which made the fear manageable. This was the birth of ritual. By performing a specific dance or telling a specific story before a hunt, they were using psychological grounding techniques to lower their cortisol levels so they could perform under pressure. Does it make you wonder if our modern obsession with horror movies is just a continuation of those first stories told around the embers? The fear of the dark was one thing, but there was a fear even more potent, the fear of being alone. Evolutionary psychologists argue that for an ancient human, social exclusion was a literal death sentence. If you were cast out of the tribe, your chances of surviving more than a few days were nearly zero. This is why we feel social pain in the same part of the brain where we feel physical pain, the anterior cingulate cortex. When ancient humans felt a rift in their social group, they reacted with intense anxiety. This fear drove the development of complex language and prosocial behaviors. We became nice to each other because we were terrified of the alternative. We developed the ability to read facial expressions with microscopic precision. We can detect a micro-expression of disgust or anger in less than a 25th of a second. This hypersensitivity to the moods of others was a survival mechanism. If you could sense the chief's anger before it turned into an exile, you could pivot, apologize, and stay within the safety of the firelight. But was there a point where this internal fear of the group became as dangerous as the predators outside? Sometimes, the environment itself would turn into a source of existential dread. Consider the Toba supereruption, which occurred approximately 74,000 years ago on the island of Sumatra. This was one of the largest volcanic events in the history of the planet, plunging the Earth into a volcanic winter that lasted nearly a decade. The sky turned gray, the plants died, and the temperatures plummeted. Genetic evidence suggests that the human population may have dropped to as few as 3,000 to 10,000 breeding individuals. This was a bottleneck event. For the humans living through it, the world was ending. They didn't have the scientific vocabulary to understand a volcanic winter, but they had the capacity for profound terror. In response, we see a massive uptick in symbolic behavior. This is the era when we start seeing more complex cave art and personal ornaments like bead necklaces. When the physical world became unpredictable and terrifying, humans doubled down on the world of the mind. They created art as a way to impose order on a chaotic universe. They marked their presence on the walls of deep, dark caves to say, "I was here and I was afraid, but I existed." Could these masterpieces of the Paleolithic be the world's oldest coping mechanisms? Speaking of caves, they provide a unique window into the sensory experience of ancient fear. Yegor Reznikov, a specialist in the acoustics of ancient spaces, has found a startling correlation in caves like Sceaux and Chauvet in France. He discovered that the areas of the cave with the highest concentration of paintings are almost always the areas with the best acoustic resonance. If you hum or clap in these spots, the sound echoes with a haunting, rhythmic intensity. This suggests that ancient humans weren't just looking at the paintings in silence. They were using sound, chanting, drumming, or singing to navigate the terrifying absolute darkness of the deep earth. The cave was a place of sensory deprivation, which can trigger hallucinations and intense fear responses in the brain. By using sound to map the space, they were taking control of an environment that should have been paralyzing. They were turning a place of fear into a cathedral. But what if the fear followed them out of the cave and into the very air they breathed? The physical toll of this constant fear was immense. When the fight or flight system is activated too often, it leads to chronic stress, which can damage the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for memory and spatial navigation. To counter this, ancient humans developed rest and digest rituals. We see evidence of this in the way they designed their living spaces. Even in the most primitive camps, there is often a clear separation between high-stress areas, like where butchery and tool-making happened, and low-stress areas, like the sleeping quarters near the back of a rock shelter. They understood, perhaps intuitively, that the brain cannot stay in a state of high alert forever without breaking. They created the first safe spaces. They used soft bedding made of insect-repellent grasses, like the 77,000-year-old beds found in Sabudu Cave in South Africa. to ensure that when they finally did close their eyes, they could achieve the deep REM sleep necessary for cognitive function. Even in a world of monsters, they found ways to curate peace. Does it make you wonder if our own modern inability to switch off is because we've lost those physical boundaries between the hunt and the home? We often think of ancient humans as being more primitive in their fears, but the reality is that their fear was more honest. They were afraid of things that could actually kill them. Today, we suffer from mismatched fear. Our amygdala fires with the same intensity over a rude email or a missed deadline as it did for our ancestors facing a leopard. This is the great irony of the modern human condition. We have inherited the most sophisticated survival hardware in the history of the animal kingdom, but we live in a world where we rarely have to use it for its original purpose. This leaves that ancient energy with nowhere to go, manifesting as generalized anxiety or phobias of things that pose no real threat. Our ancestors dealt with fear by moving, by running, fighting, or dancing. We deal with fear by sitting still and thinking about it. When an ancient human felt that surge of adrenaline, they burned it off in a burst of life-saving activity. We let it simmer in our veins, slowly wearing down our cardiovascular systems. Is it possible that the civilized life is actually more taxing on our ancient brains than the wilderness ever was? One of the most fascinating ways ancient humans managed fear was through the use of objects. The Lion Man of Hohenstein Stadel, a 40-zewan-year-old figurine carved from mammoth ivory, is a perfect example. It depicts a human body with the head of a cave lion. This wasn't just a toy. Many archaeologists believe it was a ritual object designed to capture the power of the most feared predator of the era. By carving the lion, by touching it and holding it, the human was exerting a form of symbolic dominance over their fear. This is the root of the talisman. We see this behavior in modern children who carry a security blanket or a stuffed animal. It is a way to externalize the feeling of safety. The Lion Man tells us that even 40,000 years ago, we were using our creativity to build a bridge between our terror and our courage. We didn't just wait for the fear to go away. We interacted with it. We gave it a shape so we could hold it in our hands. Have you ever considered that your own small comforts are part of a lineage of ivory carvings that stretches back to the Ice Age? There is also the matter of altruistic fear. This is the fear we feel for others, and it is perhaps the most human emotion of all. In the Cima de los Huesos, or the Pit of Bones in Spain, researchers found the remains of an individual known as Elvis, a Homo heidelbergensis who lived about 500,000 years ago. Forensic analysis showed that Elvis was quite elderly and suffered from a severely deformed pelvis and spine. He would have been in constant pain and could not have hunted or gathered effectively, yet he lived for years with these conditions. This means the tribe cared for him. They protected him from the predators they all feared. They shared their food with him. This tells us that even in the face of their own survival fears, they chose to take on the burden of another. They realized that the strength of the group wasn't just in its healthiest hunters, but in its collective compassion. They conquered the fear of wasted resources to preserve the life of a companion. This is the moment we truly became human. Does this make you look at the people around you and wonder who among you would have been the one to stay behind and help a friend in the dark? As we move through our lives, we carry these ancient responses with us. Every time your heart races when you enter a dark room, every time you feel a surge of protectiveness over a loved one, and every time you feel the need to tell a story to make sense of a tragedy, you are doing exactly what your ancestors did. We haven't outgrown our fear. We've just changed its costume. The monsters are different now. They are financial crises, social rejection, or health anxieties, but the scared human inside you is still using the same 2-million-year-old toolkit to survive. We are the descendants of the people who were the best at being afraid. The reckless ones, the ones who didn't flinch at the snap of a twig or the shadow of an eagle, didn't live long enough to become anyone's ancestor. You are here because your lineage was composed of the most observant, the most anxious, and the most community-oriented individuals in history. Your fear isn't a flaw, it's a legacy. But how often do we stop to appreciate the sheer complexity of the machinery that keeps us alive? The story of human fear is ultimately a story of triumph. It's the story of a small, hairless ape that should have been an evolutionary footnote, but instead used its terror as a catalyst for brilliance. Fear drove us to master fire, to build walls, to create language, and to invent art. It forced us to look at each other and say, "I'm afraid. Are you?" And in that shared admission, find the strength to build a civilization. We didn't survive in spite of our fear. We survived because of it. The next time you feel those hairs stand up on your arm, don't dismiss it as a random shiver. Take a second to feel the weight of the millions of years of survival that just signaled its presence. You are part of a long, unbroken chain of humans who sat in the dark and waited for the sun to rise, armed with nothing but a flickering flame and a story. And every time the sun rose, they were there to see it. Does it change how you feel about your own anxieties to know they are actually the very things that ensured your existence? The sensory world of our ancestors was a high-stakes game of detect and react. We see this in the way our hearing is tuned. Humans are particularly sensitive to sounds in the 2000 to 4000 hertz range, the exact frequency of a human scream, and also, interestingly, the sound of a predator's snarl or a baby's cry. This isn't a coincidence. Our ears are fear-shaped. We are biologically biased toward the sounds of distress and danger. Even when you are deep in sleep, your brain is still processing audio on a subconscious level, ready to snap you into full consciousness in a fraction of a second if the wrong sound occurs. This is why a loud bang can make you jump out of bed before you even know where you are. It's the startle response, a reflex coordinated by the brainstem that bypasses the thinking brain entirely. It is the most honest moment you will ever have. In that split second of a jump scare, the modern world vanishes, and you are back on the savannah, ready to fight for your life. Does it make you feel more alive to realize that your body is always ready, always watching, even when you think you're at your most vulnerable? And yet, for all the biological defense systems and the social safety nets, there was one thing ancient humans could never truly escape: the reality of their own fragility. We see this in the oldest known intentional burials, like those at Kafze in Israel, dating back nearly 100,000 years. These were not just bodies dumped in a hole, they were laid out with care, often with tools or animal bones placed beside them. This suggests a fear of the ultimate unknown, death, and the beginning of a belief in something beyond it. To combat the greatest fear of all, we created the idea of an afterlife. We decided that the fire of the human spirit couldn't just be extinguished by the dark. This was the final piece of the puzzle. By inventing a way to survive death, we gave ourselves the ultimate psychological shield. We turned the end of life into another transition, another journey to be prepared for. It was the most audacious thing a scared human ever did. But was it enough to truly silence the ancient chill? As you sit here now, the silence of your modern room might feel heavy. You've journeyed from the eagle-hunted plains of 3 million years ago to the painted cathedrals of the Ice Age. You've seen how fear built our brains, our communities, and our very souls. You've realized that the prickle on your skin is a signal from the deep past, a reminder that you are a survivor in a world designed to test you. But there is one last thing to consider. We like to believe we have conquered the world, that we are the masters of our environment, and that the ancient fears are just shadows of a bygone era. We look at the dates and the fossils and feel a sense of distance, a sense of safety. We think we are different from those huddling figures around the fire. But the truth is much closer than we care to admit, and it lies in the very timing of our evolution. Consider this. Modern civilization, with its lights and its locks and its digital safety, has existed for roughly 10,000 years. Our species, Homo sapiens, has been around for about 300,000 years, and our direct ancestors, the ones who first felt that amygdala hijack, go back at least 4 million years. If you condense the entire history of the human line into a single 24-hour day, the safe modern world where you don't have to fear a predator in the dark has existed for exactly 3.5 minutes. For the other 23 hours and 56 minutes, we were outside, we were vulnerable, and we were terrified. You aren't a modern person who occasionally feels ancient fear. You are an ancient, terrified survivor who is currently having a very brief 3-minute dream of safety. The mundane chill you feel on your arm isn't a glitch. It's the only thing about you that's actually real. So, the next time the lights go out, don't wonder why you're afraid of the dark. Instead, wonder how you ever convinced yourself you weren't. We are still that same creature, huddling together, waiting for a dawn that took 1.8 million years to arrive. Be grateful for the fear. It's the reason you're here to feel it. Now, as you prepare to move on, ask yourself, what is the one shadow in your life you've been pretending isn't there, and what would your ancestors do to face it? If this journey into the deep history of our psychology resonated with you, consider subscribing to join our tribe for more deep dives into the hidden corners of the human story.